My lawyer, Mark, leaned in and whispered 6 words. Just 6 words. And my world, the polished, self-satisfied world I had spent 15 years building, crumbled to dust. My face, which I always thought was the very picture of success and control, went completely white. I felt a chill snake down my spine, and my hands started to tremble. The divorce papers I had been so eager to sign were now shaking like leaves in a storm. Across the silent courtroom, I looked up at her. Elena. For the first time in 3 long years, she smiled. It wasn't the warm smile I had once loved. It was calm, sharp, and calculated. It was the smile of someone who had just made the final move in a chess game I never even knew I was playing. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand this total and complete collapse, you need to understand how we got here. You need to understand how a man who thought he had everything actually threw it all away with his own 2 hands. My name is Richard Sterling. I'm 44 years old, and until a year ago, I was married to Elena Wallace. 15 years of marriage. That's a long time. Long enough to build an empire, to raise a son, and long enough for a man's pride to blind him to the true value of what he has. Pride. If I had to pick one word to describe the man I was, that would be it. I met Elena when I was 24 and she was just 17. She'd graduated high school early, not because she was some genius, but because she was practical, motivated, and hardworking. She was a file clerk at a law firm, a small job, but she did it with a meticulousness that was astonishing. I remember meeting her at a client event. I was the ambitious young man, talking non-stop about my dreams of building a real estate empire. I spoke about the future as if it was already in the bag, as if success was a foregone conclusion. Elena, with her quiet calm, simply said, "Well, you'll need someone to help with the paperwork." Maybe I should have seen it then. While I was dreaming of skyscrapers, she was already thinking about the foundation. We were married when she was 19. Our son, Leo, was born a year later. Even as a new mother, Elena kept working part-time at the law firm, managing our small home, and saving every spare dollar in her own retirement account. Her grandmother had taught her that a woman should always have her own money. Looking back, that advice wasn't just wise, it was prophetic. When I was 23, my business finally started to take off. I asked her to quit her job at the firm to help me full-time. I told her I needed someone I could trust completely to manage the books, deal with clients, and coordinate with contractors. And she became my everything. Bookkeeper, office manager, client liaison, interior decorator for our model homes, marketing coordinator, event planner. She did it all while raising Leo, managing our household, and making sure my life ran smoothly. Her official title was wife. Her unofficial and true title was co-founder, unpaid COO, the silent pillar of everything I proudly called mine. For 11 years, she poured her heart and her brilliant mind into building my dream. And for 11 years, I took all the credit, all the awards, all the recognition. At every industry event, I'd introduce her as my wife, Elena. In every celebratory speech, I thanked my team, my mentors, my vision. But somehow, I never thanked the woman who made it all possible. Looking back, I can't pinpoint the exact moment things began to shift, probably because the shift was in me. Success changed me. I started to believe my own hype. I started making business decisions without consulting her. I started staying late at the office, not because of work, but because I enjoyed being surrounded by people who admired me, who looked at me like a king. I started criticizing the little things about Elena, the way she dressed, the meals she cooked. I once told her she lacked ambition. The irony is staggering. A woman who was running my entire back office for free, raising my son and keeping my life in order. And I had the audacity to say she lacked ambition. The truth is, I was afraid of her ambition. Afraid that if she recognized her own worth, she wouldn't need me. So, unconsciously and cruelly, I tried to tear her down to build myself up. It was my greatest mistake, the beginning of the end that I myself created. And then, 3 months before I stood frozen in that courtroom, I dropped the bomb. I came home on a Tuesday evening. I still remember it vividly. Elena was making dinner. The pot roast I used to say was my favorite. The smell of it used to be the smell of home. But by then, I no longer saw it as home. I saw it as an asset to be liquidated. I sat down at our kitchen table, the one where we'd shared 1,000 morning coffees, where we'd helped Leo with his homework, and I destroyed it all with a coldness that disgusts me now. I didn't look sad or apologetic. I treated it like a business negotiation. I want a divorce, I said plainly. And then, without a moment's hesitation, I added, I want the house, the cars, the business, everything. You can keep Leo. You can keep Leo. God, when I think back on those words, I just want to punch myself. I spoke about my own son, my own flesh and blood, as if he were a piece of surplus furniture, an inconvenience I was generously leaving to her. I said it like I was ordering from a menu. I'll take the assets, hold the kid. I saw the shock in her eyes, the utter disbelief, as the man she had spent her entire adult life building up turned into a stranger, a monster. 15 years of marriage, and I ended it at our kitchen table, between the salt shaker and the butter dish, as if she were just another item on a list to be discarded. What Elena didn't know in that moment, what she would only find out later, was that I had been planning this for months. I already had a lawyer, Mark Whitman, expensive and experienced. I had been building my exit strategy while she was still planning our weekly meals and scheduling my dental appointments. I thought I was so clever, so brilliant for hiding it all so perfectly. I had convinced myself this was for the best, a clean break so I could start my next chapter. I realize now it wasn't a strategy. It was a cowardly betrayal. The very next day, my mother showed up. Eleanor Sterling, a woman who had treated Elena like the hired help for 15 years, arrived with her perfectly styled hair and a well-practiced look of sympathy. She patted Elena's hand and told her she should have tried harder to keep him happy. Men have needs, dear, she said, in a tone one might use to explain something complicated to a slow child. My mother's advice on marriage was laughable, considering my father spent 7 days a week at the golf course, specifically to avoid being in the same room as her. But at that moment, I let her venom fuel my own selfishness. I let her place all the blame on Elena, and I stood by, silently agreeing. That first week was a nightmare of my own creation. I moved Elena into the guest room. I had documents drawn up, settlements proposed, timelines established. Everything moved at a dizzying pace, and I did it intentionally, to make her feel overwhelmed, to make her feel like she was drowning. Everyone around us saw a woman whose world had just collapsed, a wife being thrown away after 15 years of service, a victim who didn't see it coming. But the truth is, the only victim in this story was me, a victim of my own blinding arrogance. Within 2 weeks, I started bringing her home. Chloe Sanders, 27 years old, who worked at my company. Of course she did. She had that picture-perfect Instagram look, the blonde highlights, the manicured nails. She walked into Elena's kitchen as if she owned it, even wore the apron Elena's grandmother had left her while making smoothies in Elena's blender. I paraded her around like a trophy. We sat on our couch, watched our television, ate off our plates. I put my arm around her, right in front of Elena, as if Elena were a piece of furniture, as if she were already invisible. The humiliation escalated daily. and I cruelly enjoyed it. First, I cancelled Elena's personal credit card. "We need to separate our finances," I said with false reasonableness. Then the joint card. Then I suggested she should probably find somewhere else to stay while we sorted things out. Her own home, and I was asking her to leave. My mother came over to help her pack, and by help, I mean she went through Elena's belongings and decided what she deserved to keep. Old clothes, fine. Family photos, only some of them. Her grandmother's recipe box. She hesitated on that one, as if considering claiming it for herself. What she wasn't allowed to take: any jewelry I had bought her in 15 years. Any furniture she had picked out. "Those are marital assets," my mother explained, "and Richard is entitled to them." She packed Elena's things in garbage bags. Not boxes, garbage bags, as if she was trash being taken out of the house. And all the while, I was using another weapon against her. Jessica Holloway, Elena's best friend. I knew Jessica had a crush on me. I exploited it ruthlessly. I made her feel special, important. I vaguely hinted at a possible future for us after the divorce, just enough to keep her loyal. Elena's best friend became my spy. Whenever Elena told Jessica a plan, like that she was thinking of fighting for the house, I would know about it instantly and get a step ahead. 20 years of friendship, sold out for a few flirtatious words and my empty promises. Looking back, I didn't just destroy my family. I decimated the most important friendship of the woman I once loved. I thought I was winning, but I was just digging my own grave deeper and deeper. But the worst part wasn't how I treated Eleanor, not my mother's cruelty, not even Jessica's betrayal. The worst part, the scar that will follow me for the rest of my life, is what I did to Leo. My son saw everything. He saw Chloe, his father's new girlfriend, walking around his home. He saw his own grandmother packing his mother's belongings into trash bags. He saw the way I looked at his mother, with cold, distant eyes, as if she were a stranger. And I, in my blindness, actively poisoned his mind. I dripped venom into his ear day after day. "Your mum is making this difficult. I just want everyone to be happy. She's the one dragging this out. I'm trying to be fair, but she won't cooperate." I forced my son to choose a side, and I used every trick in the book to make sure he chose me. Leo started to pull away from his mother. It wasn't exactly anger. It was a confused, painful distance. He didn't know who to believe. And I, his father, who should have been his moral compass, was a convincing liar. I thought that having Leo on my side was a victory. I realize now that I lost the most precious thing of all, my son's respect. I could lose the house, the money, everything I'd spent 15 years building. But the moment I saw my son look at me with doubt, as if I were the problem, that was the knife. That was the wound that truly bled, and it will never heal. Elena hired a lawyer, Samantha Jones, a sharp woman recommended by her old law firm. I knew of Samantha. She was a formidable opponent. She reviewed the situation and told Eleanor she was entitled to half of everything. She was preparing for a fight. But then a strange thing happened. Elena told Samantha she didn't want to fight. Samantha was shocked. She, like everyone else, thought I had broken Eleanor's spirit, that she was too beaten down to stand up for herself. She had no idea this was all part of Eleanor's plan. Elena and Leo moved into a small apartment. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen the size of our old pantry. I saw the moving boxes stacked in the corner of Leo's room, like a monument to his mother's failure. At least, that's what I thought at the time. Meanwhile, I was posting photos with Chloe. "New chapter, new energy, blessed," I wrote. My mother commented underneath, So happy for you, sweetheart. You deserve joy." Elena's sister called her, furious, urging her to hire a shark lawyer to take me for everything I was worth. Everyone had advice. Everyone thought they knew what Elena should do. Everyone saw a woman who had given up, who was letting her husband walk all over her. And I, the arrogant fool, believed it too. I believed I was the absolute winner. It is the thing I didn't understand about being underestimated. When people think you're weak, they stop being careful around you. They stop guarding their secrets. And that's exactly when you learn everything you need to know. The truth is, the entire empire I boasted about was a house of cards, built on a foundation of lies and debt. It had started years ago, a slow slide that I hid from everyone, including myself. I got caught up in maintaining an image. The image of Richard Sterling, the successful real estate developer. I needed the expensive suits, the luxury watches, the fancy cars. I needed the lavish vacations I never took Elena on. Every time I closed a big deal, I spent more lavishly, rewarding my own genius. But the cash flow wasn't always steady. The real estate market had its ups and downs, and instead of cutting back, I chose to borrow. First, it was a second mortgage on the house, then a third. The beautiful home everyone admired, the home I thought was the symbol of my success, was actually drowning in debt. The total mortgage debt was $1.1 million, while its actual market value was only about $850,000. We were $250,000 underwater, a fact I had willfully ignored. The business was even worse. Lines of credit were maxed out. I owed back taxes. I owed vendors. I had equipment loans. The company I bragged about at every party, the company that was supposedly thriving, was drowning in nearly $500,000 of debt. Even the cars weren't mine. They were all leased, with massive balloon payments coming due. We didn't own anything. We just had incredibly expensive monthly obligations. And where had the money gone? I'd thrown it at risky cryptocurrency investments and lost it all. I'd burned through it gambling. I paid for a secret apartment Elena knew nothing about, for another woman Elena knew nothing about. I was living a double life, and the price of that fake glamour was my family's financial security. I had built an illusion, and I had believed in it so blindly. I thought I could keep borrowing, keep deceiving, and that somehow it would all work out. I didn't realize that Elena, the woman I thought was unambitious, the woman I thought only knew bookkeeping, had been quietly following the trail. 3 years before I asked for a divorce, late one night when I was working late, she had found it all. Every loan, every hidden account, every lie. And she didn't say a word. She just gathered the evidence, and she waited. The question I couldn't understand for the longest time, the one that tormented me in the sleepless nights after the hearing was, why didn't she confront me? When Elena discovered the truth 3 years ago, why didn't she scream, cry, and demand an explanation? Now, in the silence of this run-down rental apartment, the answer is painfully clear. She didn't confront me because she knew me. She knew, better than anyone in the world, that I was a master of manipulation. If she had presented me with the bank statements, I would have told her they were strategic investments, calculated risks for a bigger future. If she had asked about the mortgages, I would have explained it as the way wealthy people use financial leverage, a concept I would have implied she was too simple to understand. I might have even found a way to blame her, to say that the pressure of providing for our lifestyle had forced me to make bold moves. I would have twisted the narrative, made her feel crazy, paranoid, and guilty for ever doubting me. I had done it for years over small things, and I surely would have done it with this. She knew that a direct confrontation would have been a dead end, a fight she would lose, not because she was wrong, but because I would never admit the truth. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. And while I was busy building my house of cards, Elena was quietly building a fortress. A fortress I didn't even know existed, built from the very bricks I had dismissed as insignificant. I had always known about her own money. I remember her grandmother, a tiny woman with a will of iron who always looked at me with a skeptical eye. She had left Elena a considerable inheritance, around $340,000. At the time, I saw that money as a bonus for us. I made subtle suggestions about using it to invest in one of my projects or to upgrade the kitchen. Elena always refused, gently but firmly. "This was Grandma's," she would say. "I want to keep it safe." I had dismissed it as financial naivety, an unnecessary caution. I didn't realize it was a deliberate act of self-preservation. Then there was her IRA from her years at the law firm. I had almost forgotten it existed. To me, it was a small, insignificant sum compared to the empire I was building. In total, she had roughly $500,000 that was completely, legally, separately hers. A sum that I, in my arrogance, never factored into my calculations. I thought her security was tied to me, to my success. I didn't know she already had her own lifeboat, while I was drilling holes in the Titanic I was captaining. But what she did with that money was the true masterstroke, a move I only learned about after it was all over. She didn't just keep it in a savings account. She worked with her uncle, a retired accountant, to create an irrevocable trust for Leo. Her entire inheritance and her retirement fund went into it. Her name wasn't on it as a beneficiary. My name certainly was not on it. It was for Leo's future, for college, a first home, emergencies, and it was completely untouchable. She had built a firewall around our son's future, and that wall was designed to protect him from me. Then, she began documenting everything. Every mortgage document, every hidden account statement, every suspicious transaction. She printed copies and kept them at her sister's house. She put other copies in a safe deposit box. She saved everything on an encrypted drive. She turned my financial recklessness into her arsenal. And then, she waited. That's the most chilling part to look back on. 3 years of waiting. 3 years of living with me, sleeping in the same bed as me, smiling at dinner parties, all while knowing our entire life was built on quicksand. I misinterpreted every single sign. I thought her silence was submission. I thought her distance was sadness. Never, not once, did I think it was the patience of a hunter. I thought I was in complete control of the narrative, that I was the one who would decide when and how it ended. I didn't realize I was just an actor in her play, following a script she had written long ago. So when I finally said the words, when I sat at our kitchen table and arrogantly demanded the house, the cars, the business, everything, I can almost imagine the smile she must have struggled to suppress. I wasn't asking for assets. I was demanding to take on the debt. I was voluntarily walking straight into the trap she had been setting for 3 years. And I did it with a self-satisfied smirk on my face. Looking back on those final 3 months before the hearing, I see myself as the lead actor in a tragicomedy where I didn't know I was the punchline. The entire divorce proceeding was a masterclass performance by Elena, and I, along with my lawyer, was the captivated audience. She transformed herself into exactly what everyone expected her to be, a broken, defeated woman, barely holding on. I remember the mediation sessions. I would walk in wearing my best suit, confident and in control. Elena would arrive with red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands. She spoke softly, hesitantly, like a woman who had lost all her confidence. Her performance was so flawless that even the mediator seemed sympathetic, looking at me with a hint of reproach. "I just want enough to start over," she said during our second session, her voice cracking just so. I'm not trying to be difficult. I know the business is his life's work. I know the house means everything to him. I don't want to tear our family apart any more than it already is." She requested a settlement that made even my own lawyer raise his eyebrows at its modesty. $50,000 in cash, her personal belongings, and shared custody. That was it. I agreed immediately. I had been bracing for a fight for half of everything, which is what any reasonable lawyer would demand. Instead, she was asking for crumbs. I looked at her across that mediation table with a feeling that was almost pity. I saw myself as a magnanimous conqueror, graciously sparing a defeated foe. I thought my generosity was admirable. I realize now it wasn't pity. It was supreme blindness. I had been cast in the role of a lifetime, the fool, and I played it to perfection without even realizing it. With each passing week, my arrogance swelled. I stopped being careful, stopped pretending to be the reasonable one. I started telling anyone who would listen that Elena hadn't even put up a fight. She just gave up, I told my golf buddies. I offered her a fair settlement, and she took it without a word. My mother was even worse. She bragged at her book club, at her church group, at every social gathering she attended. "Richard is keeping everything. That woman didn't get a dime. I always knew she wasn't strong enough for my son." To celebrate my impending victory, I bought myself a new $15,000 watch. Of course, I charged it to the business. I was still using company money for personal expenses, still digging my hole deeper without a clue. I wore it to our next mediation session, making sure Elena noticed. I also took Chloe to La Maison, the French restaurant where Elena and I had celebrated our 10th anniversary. I posted photos on social media with the caption, "Life is good when you're with the right person." The right person. I meant the person who didn't know about my mountain of debt yet. Meanwhile, Chloe had started redecorating my house. Our house. New furniture in the living room, new art on the walls. She even painted Elena's kitchen gray. Gray. I remember Elena spending 3 weeks choosing that perfect shade of sage green. 3 weeks of paint samples, lighting tests, and driving herself crazy to get it just right. And Chloe painted over it with builder-grade gray, as if it were nothing. Gray, like her personality, like her future with me once she found out I was broke. Looking back, it was actually very fitting. Jessica, my spy, kept calling Elena, fishing for information under the guise of friendship. And Elena played along perfectly. "How are you holding up?" Jessica would ask, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I just want it to be over," Elena would tell her, making her voice crack slightly. "I don't have the energy to fight anymore." Within hours, I would know. I could practically feel myself relaxing, letting my guard down even further. Jessica thought she was playing Elena. In reality, she was just Elena's unpaid messenger, confirming for her that the trap was working. But while we adults were playing our games, Leah was watching. And my son, my smart, observant son, was starting to notice things that didn't add up. He noticed my new $15,000 watch, but heard me tell him we couldn't afford the school trip to Washington, D.C. He noticed Chloe's shopping bags piling up in the foyer, but heard me complain about money being tight. He saw the disconnect between the lifestyle I was projecting and the excuses I kept making. One evening, Leo went to his mother's small apartment. I learned about this later from Elena herself. He sat down at her second-hand kitchen table and looked at her with those serious eyes, so much like mine, but with something I had long since lost: honesty. "Mum," he asked quietly, "is Dad actually rich?" Elena didn't answer directly. She asked him, "What do you think?" Leo was quiet, processing. Then he said, "I think something's not right. I think he's pretending." Elena just squeezed his hand and said, "Trust me, just wait a little longer." My 15-year-old son had figured out something was wrong before 2 lawyers and a man who called himself a financial expert did. I probably should have paid him a consulting fee. Behind the curtain of the melodrama I was so thoroughly enjoying, Samantha Jones, Elena's lawyer, was preparing a legal strategy with surgical precision. The play Elena performed for me was just the tip of the iceberg. The truly destructive part, the part that would bring my entire world crashing down, was hidden in the dry, boring legal paperwork that I didn't even bother to read. The main divorce agreement, the document that I and my lawyer Mark focused on, stated clearly that Elena was relinquishing all claims to the marital property. The house, the business, the vehicles, everything would go to me. In exchange, she would receive her modest $50,000 cash settlement and walk away. To me, it was an absolute victory, an unconditional surrender. I read those terms over and over, feeling the power and triumph surge through my veins. I had gotten everything I wanted. But what I, in my haste and self-congratulation, overlooked was an attached document, an addendum, something that sounded harmless and procedural. It was titled Detailed Liability Disclosure Statement. And within that addendum lay my Trojan horse. Every debt, every mortgage, every loan, every obligation tied to the assets I was so gleefully claiming was listed in meticulous detail. When I signed the main agreement to take all the assets, I was, by legal definition, also agreeing to assume all the corresponding liabilities detailed in that addendum. The mortgages would become my sole responsibility. The business debts would transfer entirely to me. The lease obligations on the cars would be my problem alone. It was all there in black and white, legal, proper, and utterly devastating. I remember a phrase Samantha once used, one Elena later recounted to me during one of our few post-divorce conversations. Legal documents are like poetry, a boring, expensive kind of poetry that can ruin someone's life. Samantha clearly had a deep love for that kind of poetry. About 2 weeks before the final hearing, a warning flare went up, but I put it out with my own hands. Mark, my lawyer, did what a good lawyer should do. He called Samantha with a measure of concern. "My client is assuming significant assets," Mark said carefully. "I'd like to request a full financial audit before we finalize, just to verify everything." Samantha, as I was told, kept her tone perfectly neutral. "Of course, we'll provide whatever documentation you need." When Mark brought this up to me, I shut it down immediately. "No audits," I told him. My voice was full of confidence and a hint of annoyance at being questioned. "I built that company. I know exactly what it's worth. I'm not paying for some accountant to tell me what I already know." I took the suggestion as an insult to my business acumen. I was Richard Sterling. How could I not know my own financial situation? Mark pushed back. "I strongly recommend we verify the asset values before you sign. This is a significant—" "No," I cut him off. My impatience at that point wasn't just from arrogance, but from another pressure. Chloe wants this done. I want this done. No more delays. I had let the desire to please a woman who had just entered my life override sound legal advice and common sense. Mark had been practicing law for over 30 years. He knew when a client was about to make a colossal mistake. He also knew he couldn't force someone to take his advice. So he did the next best thing. He protected himself. He presented me with a waiver, a document acknowledging that he had recommended an independent financial review and that I was declining against counsel's advice. I signed it without reading it, just as I would sign everything else without reading it. I was so focused on the prize that I didn't realize I was signing my own financial death warrant. I should never have underestimated the power of an impatient girlfriend to make a man skip the fine print. Chloe, in a twisted way, saved me an audit fee, but cost me a fortune. The night before the hearing, I sent Elena a text message. "Thank you for not making this ugly." Reading that message in my mind now, I feel a wave of shame. 15 years of marriage, and I was thanking her for making it easy for me to throw her away. She replied with a simple sentence that I, at the time, took for resignation, but now understand was a quiet declaration of victory. I just want what's best for Leo. And what was best for Leo was his trust fund, his future secured, and a father who was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. That night, while I was out celebrating with Chloe, certain that by the next day I would be free and rich, Elena and Samantha were double-checking every last detail of the trap. The next morning, I walked into that courtroom expecting to collect my prize. I had no idea I was about to inherit a financial avalanche, one that I had signed for, with witnesses. Thursday, April 17th, 9 a.m., courtroom 4B. Even now, a year later, I remember every detail of that fateful morning. The way the sunlight streamed through the tall windows, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. The smell of old wood and floor polish. The quiet murmur of lawyers shuffling papers. This was where my 15 years of marriage would officially end, and where Elena's 3 years of patience would finally pay off. I arrived first. Of course I did. I always had to be the first one, the one in control. I wore my best suit, the charcoal Armani that Elena herself had helped me pick out for a client dinner years ago. My new watch caught the light as I shook Mark's hand. I felt confident, relaxed, like a man about to close an incredibly favorable deal. Chloe was waiting in the hallway. She wasn't allowed in the courtroom, but she wanted to be there for moral support. I caught a glimpse of her through the cracked door. Perfect makeup, designer handbag, scrolling through her phone as if this were just another boring appointment. My mother was there too, sitting in the public gallery. She had dressed up for the occasion, probably planning to take me to a celebratory lunch afterward. She looked at me as I walked in and gave me a little smile, the kind you give someone you've already beaten. Elena arrived a few minutes after me. She wore a simple navy dress, no jewelry, her hair pulled back in a low bun. She looked tired, defeated, like a woman who had nothing left to fight for. Perfect. She looked like someone who had given up on life and fashion simultaneously. Very convincing. As I realized later, it was the uniform of a warrior entering the final battle, not the rags of a victim. Judge Patricia Holden entered, and everyone rose. She was in her early 60s, with silver hair and reading glasses perched on her nose. 30 years on the family court bench meant she had seen every trick, every manipulation, every lie that divorcing couples could throw at each other. Nothing surprised her anymore. She reviewed the case file briefly, then looked up. Sterling versus Wallace, final dissolution hearing. I understand the parties have reached an agreement. Mark stood first. Yes, Your Honor. My client, Mr. Richard Sterling, will be assuming all marital assets, including the family residence, the real estate development business, and all associated vehicles. In exchange, Mrs. Wallace receives a cash settlement of $50,000. Samantha rose beside Elena. That is correct, Your Honor. My client agrees to relinquish all claims to these assets and accepts the proposed settlement terms. Judge Holden's eyes moved to Elena. She studied her face for a moment, likely searching for signs of coercion, signs that she was being railroaded into a bad deal. Mrs. Wallace, she said, I need to confirm that you understand what you're agreeing to today. You're giving up your claim to substantial property, the family home, the business you helped build. Are you certain this is what you want? I held my breath. If there was ever a moment for her plan to fall apart, this was it. But Elena, the master actress, kept her voice soft, slightly unsteady. Yes, Your Honor, I understand. And you're entering this agreement voluntarily? No one is pressuring you? No, Your Honor. She looked down at her hands, then back up at the judge. I just want my husband to have everything he asked for. I want this to be over. The judge studied her for another long moment. I could practically see her internal debate, whether to push harder, to order a continuance, to protect this woman from what looked like a terrible decision. But Elena was represented by counsel. She was answering clearly. She was an adult woman making her own choice. Very well, she said finally. Let's proceed. The court clerk distributed the final documents. I signed eagerly, barely glancing at what I was agreeing to. I wanted this done. I wanted to get back to my new life with my new girlfriend and my new freedom. I signed my name with a firm, decisive stroke. It was done. I had won. I glanced over at my mother and smiled. She nodded approvingly. My phone buzzed in my pocket, probably an encouraging text from Chloe. I even glanced at my phone during my own divorce hearing. That's the kind of man I was, arrogant and disrespectful. Meanwhile, on the other side of the table, Mark Whitfield was doing what I had paid him to do, but ignored his advice on. Reviewing the complete document package one last time. Main agreement signed. Asset schedule signed. Settlement terms signed. Then he reached the addendum, the liability disclosure statement. I watched his face as he read. I saw the confusion flicker across his features, saw him flip back a page, then forward again, as if hoping he had misread something. He hadn't. Mark's face went pale. He leaned toward me, trying to be discreet. Sir, he whispered, we need to talk. I waved him off, still basking in my victory. Not now. We're almost done. Mark's voice was more urgent. Sir, you're assuming all the debt. That's when I turned to look at him. What? The liability disclosure, Mark whispered, the papers rustling as he pointed. The mortgages, the business liens, it's all here. You're assuming personal liability for everything. For the first time, I actually looked at what I had signed. My eyes scanned the numbers, but my brain couldn't seem to process them. They danced before me, nonsensical and terrifying. House, $1.1 million owed. Market value, $850,000. Negative $250,000. Business, $480,000 in combined debts. Vehicles, $115,000 in lease obligations. Additional personal liabilities I had forgotten about, $200,000. Total debt, approximately $1.9 million. Net value of everything I had just triumphantly claimed as mine, negative $300,000. I hadn't won the lottery. I had just won the bill for it. An icy dread washed over me. I shot to my feet, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. The courtroom fell silent. This isn't right, I stammered, my voice cracking. I looked at Elena, then at the judge, then back at the papers. She hid this from me. This is fraud. Judge Holden's voice was sharp as glass. Mr. Sterling, sit down. These numbers are fake, I insisted, my voice rising. She manipulated the documents. This is Mr. Sterling. The judge's tone left no room for argument. Sit down. I sat, but my whole body was shaking. My confident smirk was gone, replaced by a look of pure panic. Judge Holden looked at the documents in front of her, then at me. Mr. Sterling, I'm looking at the liability disclosure statement attached to this agreement. These are debts associated with the assets you are claiming. Assets in your name, your business, your property. She fixed me with a hard stare. Are you telling this court that you don't know your own financial situation? Silence. I didn't know what to say. To admit I didn't know would make me look like an idiot. To claim I did know was to admit to the sentence I had just given myself. Every eye in the room was on me. I felt naked. Mark cleared his throat. Your Honor, I should note that I advised my client to conduct an independent financial review prior to this hearing. He declined. I have documentation. He produced the waiver, the one I had signed without reading, the one that stated in clear legal language that Mark had recommended a full audit and I had refused. Judge Holden reviewed it briefly. So, Mr. Sterling was advised to verify these figures. He chose not to. He signed a waiver acknowledging that choice. She looked at me. Is that correct? I stared at the waiver, at my own familiar signature. It looked like a snake that had just bitten me. I thought, I sputtered. Is that your signature, Mr. Sterling? A long pause. My throat felt like sandpaper. Yes. Then you assumed this risk voluntarily. Judge Holden's voice was matter-of-fact. You had the opportunity to investigate. You chose not to. The agreement stands. Desperation clawed at me. I turned to Elena, who had sat silently through all of this, watching my downfall with a terrifying calm. You knew. My voice broke. You knew about all of this. For the first time, she met my gaze directly. There was no anger, no triumph, just a cold, hard truth. I was your bookkeeper for 11 years, Richard, she said. I knew about everything. My face must have cycled through a dozen emotions. Confusion, rage, betrayal, fear, and finally, the one she had been waiting for. Realization. The understanding that no one else had done this to me. I had walked into this trap with my eyes wide open, blinded by my own arrogance. I want to withdraw the agreement, I said, turning back to the judge in a final, desperate plea. I didn't understand what I was signing. This isn't fair. Judge Holden shook her head. Mr. Sterling, you signed documents before this court stating you understood and agreed to all terms. You were represented by competent counsel. You declined additional review. Your wife did not hide anything. These are your debts, your mortgages, your obligations. She paused, letting the words sink in. The agreement is final. The gavel fell. Mrs. Wallace, you have your settlement. Mr. Sterling, you have the assets as agreed, along with all associated liabilities. This marriage is dissolved. I slumped in my chair, the papers scattered before me. My whole world, the one I thought I had just conquered, had just collapsed around me. Elena stood, smoothed her dress, and picked up her purse. Before she left, she looked at me one last time. You said you wanted everything except Leo, she said quietly, just loud enough for me to hear. I gave you exactly what you asked for. And then she walked out of the courtroom, and she didn't look back. I don't remember how I got out of the courtroom. It's all a hazy blur, punctuated by the sound of my own shouting. I screamed at Mark, demanding to know how this could have happened, threatening lawsuits. His calm response only enraged me further. I told you to get an audit. I have it in writing. You refused. In the hallway, through the glass doors, I saw Chloe's face change as she listened. I saw her look at me, really look at me, and see something other than the successful businessman she thought she was getting. She didn't say a single word to me. She simply turned and walked away, the sharp click of her high heels on the marble floor, counting down the end of another one of my life's mistakes. She was gone before I even reached the elevator. My mother tried to console me, but her words were a confused mix of blame and disbelief. "How could you not have known? That woman must have hidden something." She couldn't accept that her perfect son could have made such a monumental mistake. It was much easier to blame Elena, but the documents didn't lie. My signature was on every loan, every mortgage. They were my choices, my signatures. The collapse happened faster than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't a slow decline, it was a chain reaction explosion. Within 2 weeks, Chloe had moved out. She packed her things in the middle of the night and left a note that said, "This isn't what I signed up for." The grey kitchen she had been so proud of sat empty and cold. Within a month, I tried to sell the house. But when you owe more than something is worth, there are no buyers, only calls from the bank about missed payments, and realtors suggesting a short sale. Within 2 months, the business started to default. Vendors filed lawsuits. The line of credit was frozen. Employees started quitting when their paychecks bounced. The company I had spent 15 years building, the company I had sacrificed my family for, was turning to dust. Within 3 months, I was meeting with bankruptcy attorneys. The man who once bragged about his empire was now calculating which assets could be protected from creditors. The answer was almost none. My mother's perfect son was calling relatives to ask for loans, showing up at family members' houses with excuses and explanations. No one knew about the debt. Elena must have hidden it somehow. I was tricked. But my story grew weaker and weaker as the truth came to light. While my world was imploding, Elena's was being rebuilt. Her $50,000 settlement, the sum I had once scoffed at, was being used wisely to start over. First month's rent, a security deposit, basic furniture that wasn't falling apart. It wasn't luxury, but it was stability. Leo's trust fund remained untouched, a fortress protecting his future. And Elena, she enrolled in interior design courses at a community college. The dream she had put on hold at 23 to help me build my empire, she was now finally building for herself. I heard her first client was a woman who had just ended a 28-year marriage. "How do you start over?" the woman had asked. And Elena had replied, "One room at a time, one color at a time, one day at a time." They painted the woman's kitchen sage green. About 3 months after the divorce, in a fit of desperation, I went to her apartment. I barely recognized myself in the mirror before I left. I had lost weight, and not in a healthy way. There were dark circles under my eyes. My suit was wrinkled. The watch was gone, sold to pay one of the countless bills. I looked like a man who had been through a war and lost. I stood at her doorway, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for myself. Almost. "I didn't know it was this bad," I said, my voice hoarse. "I made mistakes, I know that now, but I didn't mean for any of this to happen." She leaned against her doorframe and looked at me. Really looked at me. This man she had loved for nearly half her life. This man who had thrown her away like trash. This man who was now drowning in the consequences of his own choices. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice almost a plea. "Maybe we can figure something out. I don't know, maybe we could..." I couldn't even finish the sentence. I couldn't bring myself to ask for what I really wanted. Help. Her help. After everything. She was unmoved. "You asked for everything except Leo," she said calmly. "You got exactly what you wanted." "Elena, please." "Goodbye, Richard." She closed the door. I stood in that hallway for 10 minutes. I know it was exactly 10 minutes because I looked at my watch. Oh, right, I didn't have one anymore. I just stood there, listening to the silence on the other side of the door, hoping it would open again. It didn't. That door, like so many others in my life, was now permanently closed, and I was the one who had handed her the key to lock it. I finally turned and walked away. the echo of her refusal louder than any shouting match had ever been. That evening, after closing the door on me, Elena sat in her small living room and looked at the photo of her grandmother. At least, that's what I imagine. I picture her looking at the recipe box, the one sentimental thing my mother almost took, and feeling a deep sense of peace. I can almost hear her whispering to herself, "You were right about everything, Grandma. Keep your own money, know your worth, and never let anyone make you feel small." Her apartment was small, quiet, nothing like the house we lived in for 15 years. But it was hers. Every paint color, every piece of furniture, every decision was hers. And for the first time in a very long time, she was free. The bitterest irony is that I also got the freedom I thought I wanted. Freedom from a marriage I was too arrogant to cherish. Freedom from the responsibilities of being a proper father. But it's an empty freedom. A freedom inside the prison of my own debt and regret. Leo, my son, eventually understood everything. Not because Elena explained it, but because he pieced it together himself. He saw the court documents I'd left strewn across my table in a fit of rage. He heard my increasingly flimsy excuses. He watched Chloe leave. He saw his grandmother panic. He watched the entire fake facade crumble. One evening, about a month after the divorce, you came to visit me at my rundown rental apartment. "Mom waited 3 years," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. "She knew that whole time, and she just waited." I tried to defend myself. I didn't know. I wanted to protect you." He looked me straight in the eye, and in my 15-year-old son's gaze, I saw not anger, but a profound disappointment. "Mom protected me," he said. "She made sure I'd be okay, no matter what happened between you two." The trust fund. The $520,000, safe and untouchable. He knew about it. Then he hugged me. A brief, awkward hug, nothing like the warm embraces from Elena. It was the hug a son gives a father he pities and is disappointed in. That hug said, "I understand." And it also said, "I'm proud of Mum." That hug hurt more than any criticism ever could. So now, here I am, telling this story not for sympathy, but perhaps for my own understanding. To try and pinpoint the exact moment I went wrong, the moment ambition curdled into greed, love into complacency, and a husband into a monster. I lost everything. The house, the business, the cars, the mistress. And most importantly, I lost the respect of my son and the love of a woman who once looked at me like I was her entire world. She gave me exactly what I asked for, and in doing so, she took back everything she had given me: her time, her talent, her devotion, and her heart. It turns out, those were the only assets that ever truly had value, and I, in my blindness, had left them off the balance sheet. It was a $1.9 million mistake, and a lifetime of regret. If you've listened this far, maybe you're looking for a lesson. The lesson is simple, but I had to pay an impossible price to learn it. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Never mistake kindness for weakness. And above all, never become so arrogant that you believe your own lies. Because one day, someone might be holding the bill, and they'll hand it to you when you least expect it. Thank you so much for listening. I know this story isn't pleasant, but it's my truth. Maybe by telling it, I can start to build something from the ashes. Not an empire, but a better man. I hope so.